Jared Martin never intended to become the sort of man who broke things when he was angry. He grew up trying to be the opposite, quiet, steady, the one who held the wrench instead of throwing it, the one who tightened loose screws in other people's lives because they couldn't do it themselves. But a person's limits aren't always where he thinks they are. Sometimes they sit just a little behind his patience, waiting for that one day when enough is finally enough. That day arrived in the middle of June. Under a sun so hot, it felt like it was peeling the asphalt off the roads of southern Arizona. The town of Ridgeview was small, dusty, and forgotten by everyone except the people who never had the means to leave. Car repairs were the lifeblood of the place. Engines seized in the heat, tires split under the pressure, batteries died twice as fast. For Jared, that meant endless work at McKinley's auto shop, where he spent every weekday lying beneath hoods of cars that weren't worth the cost of their own replacement parts. He didn't complain. Not when business was slow. Not when it was too hot to breathe. Not even when his boss, Mr. McKinley, made a habit of processing paychecks late or docking hours for reasons that evaporated the moment Jared tried to question them. What else was he going to do? Jobs in Ridgeview didn't exactly grow on cactus trees. But that morning, something shifted in him. Jared had been working overtime for 2 weeks straight, trying to scrape together enough money to keep his 14-year-old brother, Evan, in school supplies, groceries, and shoes that didn't slip open at the heel when he ran for the bus. Their parents were gone now. Their father buried under a heart attack and their mother long disappeared into whatever new family she had created in Nevada. That left only the two brothers, living in a cramped 2-bedroom rental at the edge of town where the roof leaked during monsoon season and the swamp cooler rattled like it was dying a little more each day. Responsibility wasn't a word for Jared, it was gravity. So when he walked into McKinley's office that morning with his timesheet in hand, expecting a paycheck he desperately needed, and his boss waved him off with a lazy, "Next week, kid. I don't got it today." Something deep inside him snapped. "Next week," Jared repeated, as though making sure he hadn't misheard. McKinley didn't even look up from his computer. "Yeah, come on, you know the drill. Sometimes the cash flow's weird." "You said that last week," Jared said quietly. McKinley shrugged with a smirk. "And now I'm saying it again. Must mean it's true." It wasn't the words. It wasn't even the casual cruelty. It was the almost amused smile. Like Jared wasn't a man trying to support a little brother, but a piece of equipment McKinley could overuse and leave rusty in a corner. "Mr. McKinley," Jared said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need that money. I've put in the hours. Hell, I've put in more hours than anyone else here. You can't just keep pushing this off." "Watch me," McKinley said, voice flat. "Door's there if you don't like it." Jared felt something burn up the back of his neck. It wasn't rage at first, it was humiliation. He thought of Evan asking whether they could buy a new backpack before school started. He thought of the empty fridge, the rent due in 9 days, the electric bill he'd shoved into the junk drawer because he didn't want his brother to see the red overdue stamp. He thought of all the nights he'd stayed late at the shop because McKinley said he'd make it worth his while. And now this offhand dismissal. This reminder of just how powerless he really was. Something hot and sharp broke loose in his chest. He walked out of the office, not toward the exit like McKinley expected, but toward the front of the shop. The glass door reflected the bright sky, turning the whole outside world white and blurry. Jared didn't remember intending to do anything. He only remembered the moment when his fist flew forward, hard as a piston, and the glass shattered like a scream. The crash echoed through the entire shop. Mechanics spun around. McKinley came stumbling out of his office, eyes bulging. "What the hell did you just?" But Jared didn't hear the rest. He was staring at his scraped knuckles, at the glittering fragments raining to the floor, at the warped shape of his own reflection in the fractured surface still clinging to the frame. For one heartbeat, he felt relief, the way pressure releases when a gasket finally blows. Then the consequences arrived. McKinley called the sheriff before Jared even had time to catch his breath. A patrol car rolled up within minutes. They cuffed Jared without much drama. Small towns loved simple stories, and this one was already writing itself. Hardworking business owner attacked by unstable employee. Jared didn't argue, didn't fight. Didn't even speak as they put him in the back of the cruiser. All he could think about was Evan. What the hell was he going to tell him? The judge who saw him 2 days later wasn't unkind, but she was firm. Property damage, even minor, had to be taken seriously. She sentenced him to 120 hours of community service, with 40 hours specifically assigned to the Phoenix Metro Police Department's backlog of clerical work. That should teach you responsibility, the judge said. Jared wanted to laugh. Responsibility was the one thing he already had too much of. He didn't contest the sentence. He couldn't afford a lawyer. He couldn't afford a fine. This was the least destructive option. And at least he wouldn't be in jail. Evan needed him too badly for that. The police department was a world apart from the garage. Bright fluorescent lights instead of dim shop lamps, polished tile instead of concrete stained with oil, and the smell of burnt coffee instead of engine grease. On his first day, Jared was led through a maze of hallways until he reached the records room, where mountains of old case files sat in towering metal cabinets, half digitized, half forgotten. Your job is simple, a supervising officer told him. Copy handwritten reports into typed formatting. Some of these are too old for the scanning software to read. Jared nodded, though part of him died inside. He fixed engines, not grammar mistakes. He worked with motion, force, and metal, not paperwork. But he didn't complain. He sat down at the assigned desk, picked up a file labeled March 2018, drug seizure incident, and started copying. His handwriting wasn't pretty, and the officer overseeing him, Lieutenant Paul Bradley, made a point of criticizing it every so often. The T in traffic stop looks like an F, Bradley said on Jared's first day. That's because the pen is dried out, Jared replied before he could stop himself. Bradley raised an eyebrow. Then get a new one. Don't make excuses. Bradley was one of those officers who carried authority like a heavy baton, ready to swing it if anyone tested him. He wasn't loud, but he had a presence, an air of someone who enjoyed control a little too much. His uniform was always immaculate, his hair razor short, his smile thin enough to cut. Jared avoided eye contact with the man whenever he could. Hours passed slowly. The handwriting in the reports varied wildly. Some elegant, some chaotic, some barely legible. Jared moved through each like a mechanic inspecting an engine. Line by line, detail by detail. He worked quietly, efficiently. By the end of his first week, something odd began to tug at the edge of his attention. It happened with a report from late 2019. Jared copied the events exactly as written. Officers responded to a suspicious vehicle behind Martinez grocery store at 11:42 p.m. Suspect fled. Drugs recovered. Case closed. Except Jared knew that grocery store. Everyone in Ridgeview did. It burned down in 2017 and never reopened. The alley behind it no longer existed. The building had been demolished, replaced by an empty lot fenced off with iron posts. He checked the date again. It wasn't a typo. Why would an officer file a report about a location that wasn't there anymore? He set the report aside. Then it happened again, different file, different date. A signature that looked too perfect, too clean, like it was pasted from a template. A timestamp written in pen that didn't match the digital entry printed at the bottom. A suspect supposedly processed through holding, yet no holding log was attached. Coincidence, he told himself at first. Sloppy paperwork. Human error. Police departments were notorious for backlogs and mismatched files. This was why he was here in the first place. But after the fifth, then the sixth similar incident, something in Jared's chest tightened. Sloppiness didn't look like this. Patterns did. And the strangest part? All 6 questionable reports had the same supervising officer's name on them. Lieutenant Paul Bradley. Jared tried to dismiss it. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't even supposed to be reading these files, just copying them. But the mechanic in him wouldn't let it go. When you see the same part failing over and over, it's not a coincidence, it's a system problem. So he began quietly putting aside the files that felt off. Not removing them, not hiding them, just creating a small stack on the corner of his desk. No one paid attention anyway. To them, he was invisible, just a guy paying off a sentence. Even so, he felt the air grow heavy whenever Bradley walked near. The lieutenant moved like he could smell secrets. Jared made sure never to look guilty, never to flinch, never to let his eyes linger too long on anything. At home, he tried not to think about it. Evan was already stressed having a brother doing court-ordered work. He didn't need more reasons to worry. Jared did what he always did. Put on a calm face, cooked dinner, made sure Evan did his homework, and checked the locks twice before bed because responsibility had a way of turning everything into a precaution. But late at night, lying awake in the dark, his mind wandered back to the reports. Those pages full of contradictions and omissions. He thought of the suspects who were arrested and then inexplicably released. He thought of evidence logs that didn't match. He thought of the grocery store that no longer existed. By the second week, the stack of questionable reports had grown taller. Jared didn't know what to do with them. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't belong in police business. But he also couldn't unsee the inconsistencies. And something deep inside him, something stubborn, something moral, began whispering that this wasn't just a matter of messy paperwork. Something bigger lurked in those mismatched lines of ink. He just didn't know what. Late one afternoon, as he worked through another file, a shadow fell across his desk. He glanced up quickly, expecting Bradley again. But it wasn't him. It was Officer Lena Grayson. She wasn't like the others. Younger, sharper, always looking like she was 10 steps ahead of the conversation. The kind of officer who actually read reports instead of just signing them. Jared had seen her around the department, running between calls, talking fast into her radio, always in motion. Now she stood perfectly still, studying the stack of sorted reports on his desk. "Busy day?" she asked. Jared swallowed. "Just doing my hours." Lena moved closer, eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed how he had organized the documents. By date, by arresting officer, by inconsistencies. Not the way they were originally filed. "You grouped these," she said. "I was just trying to keep them organized." "No," she replied quietly. "You were trying to make sense of them." Jared felt his pulse rise. He didn't know why she cared. He didn't know whether she was friend or threat. But something in her expression, curiosity mixed with concern, kept him from lying. "I noticed some mistakes," he admitted. "Maybe. Or patterns," Lena said. He didn't answer. She leaned slightly closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not wrong. And you're not imagining it." His heart froze. Lena looked around the room to make sure they were alone. "Be careful with what you notice here. Some people don't appreciate observers." She meant Bradley. He didn't need her to say it. Before Jared could respond, Lena stepped back, the moment over as quickly as it began. "Finish up for today," she said aloud, returning to her professional tone. "You're clear to go in 10 minutes. Then she left the room. Jared stared after her, feeling the ground shift under his feet. He wasn't the only one who saw the problems. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't imagining corruption. And if Lena knew something, then maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as powerless as he thought. He packed up his things, but his mind didn't leave the records room. The reports felt heavier now, the inconsistencies sharper, the implications darker. As he stepped out of the police department and into the cooling desert evening, he felt a subtle but undeniable change. He didn't know it yet, but he had crossed a threshold, one he could never step back from. For the first time since his sentencing, the world outside the station didn't feel quiet. The wind carried a warning. The fading light seemed to flicker with danger. And the night felt like it was waiting for him to make a choice. Fix what he saw, or ignore it. A mechanic understands better than most. When a system starts failing, ignoring the problem doesn't make it go away. It makes it catastrophic. And somewhere deep in the records room behind him, something catastrophic was already brewing. Jared didn't yet know the full scope, but he was about to. The next day would bring the discovery that pushed everything over the edge and pulled him toward a path he never imagined walking. One that would lead straight into the heart of a corruption network and force him to decide what kind of man he truly was. A man running from trouble, or a man facing it. Either way, Chapter 2 waited for him with the same inevitability as dawn. Jared didn't sleep that night. He lay in the faded twin bed he'd had since high school, the springs creaking every time he shifted. Evan's room was down the hall, its door cracked open so the boy wouldn't feel alone in the dark. The house was small, but it was theirs, or at least it was theirs as long as Jared could keep paying the rent. The swamp cooler rattled like a dying engine, pushing warm air around the room, but Jared barely felt it. His thoughts were louder than the heat. He kept replaying the conversation with Officer Grayson, trying to understand her tone. Was it a warning? An invitation? A test? She had looked at him as though she saw something in him that he didn't see in himself. Something sharper than a mechanic who'd made one stupid mistake and ended up copying police reports in the basement of a precinct. She looked at him like someone who mattered. But mattering was dangerous. He turned on his back, staring at the cracked ceiling. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, then another. Tires hissed down the main road, engines straining in the heat. Jared closed his eyes, but every time he did, he saw the stack of reports, the mismatched timestamps, the phantom alley behind a burned-out grocery store, the signature that wasn't a signature. It was like a broken engine he couldn't stop hearing even when it wasn't in front of him. A grinding, wrong sound that wouldn't leave his mind. By the time morning dawned in a pale wash of gray-yellow light, Jared felt more exhausted than when he'd laid down. He made coffee that tasted like burnt dirt, fried eggs that stuck to the pan, and packed Evan's lunch while pretending everything inside him wasn't twisting tighter by the minute. "You gonna be home early today?" Evan asked, stuffing books into his backpack. Jared forced a smile. "Should be. Don't worry." Evan shrugged. He was 14, old enough to pretend he didn't worry, but young enough that his eyes betrayed him. Jared felt a familiar stab of guilt. He hated that his mistakes always splashed over onto Evan's life. The boy deserved better than a brother with a criminal sentence and a mountain of problems. After dropping him at school, Jared drove to the police department, his hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. The sky was cloudless, a sheet of blinding white blue that promised another scorching day. He parked in the back lot, where the asphalt shimmered like black glass, and walked through the employee's entrance the way he'd been instructed. The halls felt different that morning. He couldn't say how. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe Lena Grayson's quiet warning had opened a door in his mind he couldn't close again. In the records room, everything looked the same. File cabinets lining the walls like soldiers standing at attention, stacks of boxes labeled with faded marker ink, a scattering of desks that had seen decades of wear. But Jared's desk was no longer just a desk. It was the center of something. Pivot point. A crack in a wall he hadn't meant to touch. He took a seat and pulled the next batch of reports toward him. For a while, nothing unusual happened. He copied a noise complaint, then a trespassing report involving a drunk man trying to sleep in an abandoned car, then a traffic stop that ended in nothing more than a stern warning. He began to think he'd overreacted the day before, that maybe he'd been too eager to find patterns. Then he saw the name Bradley again. Lieutenant Paul Bradley. His signature stamped at the bottom of a report like a brand. This time it was a follow-up report from a narcotics arrest 6 months ago. Jared skimmed it mechanically at first, just getting the overview. Suspect apprehended in an alley behind a liquor store. Small quantity of meth recovered. No injuries reported. Nothing unusual. But as he copied the details, something snagged. The evidence log listed a clear plastic bag containing crystalline substance, approximate 19 grams. Yet the arresting officer's statement, which the report summarized, mentioned only a very small amount, described as less than a gram. That wasn't a tiny difference. That was a gulf. 19 grams could lead to charges of possession with intent to distribute. Less than 1 gram could be personal use. Different charges meant different bail. Different bail meant different access and different costs to make things go away. Jared checked the suspect's name. He remembered seeing it before. He dug into the growing stack of questionable reports on the corner of his desk. There it was, the same name processed through holding once before for a different minor drug possession charge. And just like the others, he'd been released almost instantly. Why? Jared leaned back, rubbing his forehead. He knew nothing about the law, but he knew engines, and this smelled like a swapped part. a mismatched component that didn't belong. He kept copying. He didn't know what else to do. He wasn't an investigator. He wasn't even an employee. He was a guy doing community service. But patterns ignored tend to grow louder. Around noon, Bradley walked into the records room. His presence always sucked the air out of the space, flattening conversation and straightening spines. He moved with the arrogant efficiency of a man who believed his authority was unquestionable. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on Jared. "How's the workload?" he asked, voice smooth. Jared swallowed. "Fine, sir. You're making better time than you were last week," Bradley said, walking closer. "I appreciate efficiency." "Thanks." Bradley glanced at the stack of reports on Jared's desk. Specifically, the pile Jared had made of questionable documents. It was subtle, a half-second, a flicker of interest, but Jared felt it like a punch. "What's that?" Bradley asked casually. Jared's throat went dry. "Just files I'm sorting." Bradley didn't blink. "Sorting by what?" "Date," Jared said quickly. Too quickly. Bradley's eyes narrowed. There was no anger, no suspicion he let surface. Just a cold, calculating silence, like an engine running too quietly to be trusted. "Well," Bradley finally said, "don't make your job harder than it needs to be. Keep everything in order, copy the text, return it to the same file. No need to reorganize anything." Jared nodded, his pulse hammering. Bradley gave him a stiff smile and walked out. Jared waited a full minute before exhaling. When the door clicked shut, he felt like he'd been standing on the edge of something tall, staring down. That was when Lena Grayson stepped into the room. She didn't announce herself. She didn't make eye contact at first. She just crossed her arms and stood behind him, as though reading the air he'd just been forced to breathe. "He was watching you," she said quietly. "I noticed. You shouldn't keep those stacks visible." "I'm not doing anything wrong." Lena shook her head, lips tight. "That doesn't matter. With Bradley, perception is reality. If he thinks you're up to something, even if you aren't, he'll make you pay for it." "He already made me pay," Jared muttered. "That's why I'm here." Lena's expression softened. "Just a fraction." "I know." He looked up at her. "Why did you say all that yesterday?" She glanced toward the hallway, checking for movement. "Because I've seen too much go missing under his watch. Too many cases cleaned up too neatly. Too many suspects whose pockets are heavier when they walk out than when they walked in. And because I don't know who else to trust." Jared felt the words like a weight he'd never wanted but couldn't shrug off. He turned back to the report in front of him. "I'm not trying to get involved." "You are involved," Lena said. "You noticed things you weren't supposed to notice. And now he's noticed you noticing." Jared let out a humorless laugh. "Great." Lena leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen carefully. If you find anything else, anything, even if it's small, set it aside. Don't mention it to anyone. Not officers, not clerks, not administrators. Especially not Bradley." "And tell you?" he asked. "If and only if you want to." She paused, eyes holding his. "But I need you to understand something. You're not safe if he thinks you're a threat." "I'm not a threat." "You are," she said softly. "That's why this matters." Then she left as silently as she'd come. Jared stared at the doorway long after she disappeared. He felt the ground shift under him again, the same way it had shifted the moment he cracked that glass door at McKinley's shop. That same feeling of recognizing a mistake and realizing it couldn't be undone. He turned back to the next file, and the next, and the next. By late afternoon, when the sun had begun its long slide toward the western horizon, painting the desert outside in gold and dust, Jared stumbled across something that chilled him more than anything he'd found before. It was a set of bodycam logs. Routine procedure, usually dull. Jared had copied dozens of them. Timestamps, officer names, notations about whether footage was uploaded correctly. Everything was standard until he hit the fourth entry in the sequence. The date was right. The officer name was right. But the timestamp had two different metadata stamps. One embedded in the text file, one printed on the page. One said 2214. The other said 138. Bodycam footage didn't spontaneously change timestamps. It didn't rewrite history on its own. This wasn't a typo. It was a correction, an alteration, a rewrite. Jared stared at the page for a long time. Longer than he should have. The room around him felt too still, too heavy. He checked the officer name again. It was one he'd seen before. Not Bradley, one of Bradley's men, the same ones whose reports always crossed his desk with some odd detail tucked inside. He flipped the page over. The back was blank. But the front practically screamed. Someone had tampered with evidence. Not sloppy paperwork. Not laziness. Intent. Jared rubbed his forehead again, pressing his fingers hard against the skin, trying to think. He wasn't stupid. He could put pieces together even if he didn't have the full puzzle. Bodycam data was sacred in law enforcement. Untouched. Unalterable. It was the raw truth. If truth was being altered. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't want to. The records room was quiet except for the fan rattling near the window. Jared suddenly felt exposed, like every wall had eyes. He slid the page into the questionable stack and quickly covered the stack with a neutral, harmless file noise complaint. A dog barking, nothing dangerous. He didn't want Bradley or anyone else to know he'd seen it. But he knew, and now he couldn't unknow. When his shift finally ended, Jared walked to his car with his head down and his shoulders tight. The heat clung to him like a second skin. He could feel the future pressing in on him, a heavy, suffocating thing. He didn't know what to do. He didn't want to get involved. But involvement had found him. Evan was already home when Jared got back. The boy was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, watching a documentary about space travel, his favorite. He looked up when Jared entered, smiling shyly. "Hey, you okay?" Jared nodded. "Yeah, long day." They ate dinner, spaghetti with too much pepper because Jared always got the seasoning wrong. And Evan talked about school, about a group project, about a girl in his math class he refused to name. Jared forced himself to smile, forced himself to be present. When Evan went to bed, Jared sat in the living room, staring at the muted TV screen. He had a choice. Ignore everything. Finish his community service. Move on. Or listen to the gnawing in his gut telling him that something was wrong in that precinct. Something he was already entangled in. He didn't choose that night, but the choice was coming. It came the next day, when he opened another file that shouldn't have existed. When he discovered something that would shatter the last illusion he had about the police department he was serving in. And whether he liked it or not, Chapter 3 was waiting for him with answers he wasn't prepared to face, and consequences he couldn't escape. Jared woke before his alarm went off, sitting upright in bed as if some invisible hand had yanked him from sleep. Dawn hadn't even broken yet, but the world outside the window gloated its emptiness. A pale, washed-out quiet before the heat took over. His heart felt tight, pumping too fast, and for a few seconds he couldn't tell if he'd actually heard something or only dreamed it. But no, nothing had woken him. It was his mind working overtime the way an engine runs hot long after you've turned the key. He scrubbed his hands over his face, trying to shake off the fog. His knuckles still bore faint scars from the shattered door at McKinley's shop, thin pale lines that glimmered faintly in the early light. They felt symbolic now, like tiny reminders of the moment everything had tilted off its axis. He got up, showered, dressed, and cooked breakfast quietly enough not to wake Evan, who had stayed up late finishing a science project. The house felt smaller this morning, the ceiling lower, the walls tighter, as if every nail and beam sensed the storm swirling inside Jared and was bracing itself. He dropped Evan at school with a forced smile, then made his way to the precinct. The closer he got, the more his stomach churned. The building rose from the pavement like a stark, angular threat, concrete and glass, unforgiving, sun-scorched. He parked in the back lot, took a deep breath, and walked toward the entrance. Nothing looked different, and yet everything did. He swiped in, passed through the metal detector, nodded to the desk sergeant who barely glanced at him, and made his way down the hall toward the records room. His footsteps echoed off the tile, steady, controlled, even though he didn't feel steady at all. Inside, the records room hummed with old machines and stale air. A faint smell of dust and burnt paper hovered like a ghost. Jared sat at his desk as quietly as possible, hoping to blend into the background. For a while, he copied files without incident. Noise complaints, petty thefts, a minor car accident on the interstate, household disputes, the usual mundane fragments of life in a city that never slept but rarely dreamed. But around mid-morning, something happened that took the ground out from under him. It was a thin manila folder, slightly bent at the corner as if someone had gripped it too hard. The handwriting on the front read simply, "Internal log, do not remove." Jared frowned. Internal logs weren't usually sent to the transcription pile. They were stored separately, often restricted to certain ranks. So why was this one here? He opened the folder carefully. Inside was a series of printouts, system logs from a case-handling database. Technical, dry. Mostly timestamps, referencing when video files had been uploaded, when reports had been marked reviewed, when evidence had been checked in or out. But as he scanned through them, something clicked. The logs referenced the same bodycam file he'd seen yesterday, the one with the inconsistent timestamps. It wasn't immediately obvious, but the digital trail pointed to one particular user accessing the file at a strange hour, long after his shift should have ended. User ID, PDBRDL, 55. Bradley's. Jared felt his stomach drop. He flipped through the pages faster now, searching for more evidence. There was another entry, editing access granted to the same user ID. File overwritten. Timestamp adjusted. Metadata altered. Notes missing. This wasn't accident or error. Bradley had tampered with bodycam footage. Jared stared at the page, throat tight, hands trembling. He didn't know everything about policing, but he knew this. Altering evidence wasn't just misconduct. It was criminal. It was the kind of thing that could tank cases, free suspects, ruin investigations. It was the kind of thing only someone very confident or very desperate would dare to do. He suddenly felt the walls around him closing in. The air grew thick. He reached up and tugged the collar of his shirt, trying to breathe. His heart thudded painfully, like a piston threatening to seize. He needed to hide the folder before anyone walked in. He slid it under a less conspicuous pile. Dog barking complaint, broken mailbox, a teenager's prank, and forced himself to resume copying a completely unrelated file. His handwriting wobbled. He could hardly see the words. That was when he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of someone watching him. He froze. Across the room, in the doorway, stood Lena Grayson. Her arms were crossed. Her face was tense. Not angry, but concerned, the way a person looks when seeing someone standing too close to the cliff's edge. She walked in slowly, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on him. "You found something," she said. Not a question. A certainty. Jared swallowed hard. "I shouldn't tell you here." Her eyes flicked to the hallway. "Then follow me. Now." She didn't wait for him to answer. She stepped into the hall, making sure no one was close, then moved toward a supply closet near the end of the wing. She pushed the door open and slipped inside. Jared hesitated only a moment before following. Lena shut the door behind them. The supply closet was cramped, smelling of old paper, disinfectant, and dust. A flickering fluorescent bulb cast a pale glow that made the shadows twitch. They stood close enough to feel each other's breath. "What did you find?" she asked. Jared took out the internal log file and handed it to her. She flipped through it quickly, eyes sharp, trained, her jaw tightening with each new page. When she reached the last entry, she closed the folder carefully, as though it were made of glass. "This is worse than I thought," she whispered. "So you suspected," Jared began. "I suspected tampering, but not this level. Not bodycam footage itself. That's the holy grail of policing. You don't touch that unless you're covering something up." "And Bradley." She didn't finish. Jared asked quietly, "What do we do?" Lena looked at him, and something unguarded flickered across her face. A mix of fear and resolve. "We gather more. Enough to take to internal affairs. Enough to make it impossible for them to sweep under the rug." But we have to be careful. We do this wrong, and Bradley won't just threaten our jobs. He'll destroy us. Jared's breath caught. Destroy us how? You have no idea who he's connected to, she said. And neither do I. But I've seen enough to know he isn't acting alone. A chill crawled up Jared's spine. Lena took a step closer. Not intimate, urgent. I need you to trust me. He hesitated. Why me? Because you see things, she said. Because you're not jaded like the rest of us. Because you don't know the politics here, and that makes you the only one Bradley hasn't gotten to. And because you've already put yourself in danger whether you realize it or not. Jared lowered his head, exhaling shakily. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't trained for this. He repaired broken engines, not broken justice systems. But something inside him was shifting, like metal bending under pressure. He thought about Evan. He thought about all the people these falsified reports might have impacted. People with fewer second chances than he had. People who didn't have Lena looking out for them. People whose lives were ruined because someone like Bradley wanted money more than morality. He looked up. Okay, I'm in. Lena nodded once. An acknowledgement, a pact sealed without ceremony. But before she could say more, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful, too close. Lena's eyes widened in warning. She motioned for Jared to step back, then whispered sharply, "Don't let him see that folder." She stuffed the internal log file under a stack of paper towels in the closet and stepped out into the hallway, wearing an expression of practiced neutrality. Lieutenant Paul Bradley appeared moments later. His gaze went from Lena to the closet, then to Jared emerging a second behind her. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did. Thickened, darkened, sharpened like the edge of a blade. "What are you two doing?" Bradley asked mildly. "Cleaning supply issues," Lena said without missing a beat. The inventory log was off. Had to double-check. Bradley's gaze slid to Jared, slow and precise. "Is that so?" Jared forced a nod. "Yeah, I was helping." Bradley studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching thin. Then he stepped forward, closer than necessary, tilting his head as if inspecting something under the hood of a car. "You've been very diligent lately, Martin," he said softly. "Very thorough." It didn't sound like praise. Lena moved subtly between them. "He's doing what he was told." Bradley smiled. A thin, humorless line. "I'm sure he is." Then he stepped back, hands clasped behind him. "Remember, Martin," he said, voice low. "You're here on borrowed time. Your job is simple. Don't overcomplicate it." Jared nodded, though his pulse thundered in his ears. Bradley turned and walked away, the echo of his boots lingering like a threat. Lena waited until the sound faded, then whispered, "That was too close." "What do we do now?" Jared asked. "We move," she said, carefully. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Jared worked, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time a shadow shifted in the hallway, he stiffened. Every time a phone rang, his heart thudded. He knew Bradley suspected something, maybe not yet what, but something. Before leaving, Jared retrieved the hidden folder and slipped it into a stack of unrelated documents. He didn't dare take it home. If Bradley discovered it missing, he'd immediately know who to blame. Instead, he left it exactly where it belonged, buried in plain sight. When he finally stepped into the late afternoon air, he felt the sun hit him like a physical force. He drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheel until the leather creaked. Evan greeted him with a grin, waving a homework sheet. "Look, I got a B+. Jared forced himself to smile and ruffled his hair. "Proud of you, kid." But inside he was unraveling. After Evan went to bed, Jared sat alone in the darkened kitchen, a single lamp glowing over the table. He held his head in his hands, breathing slowly as the weight of everything pressed down harder. He didn't know how deep this went. He didn't know how dangerous Bradley really was. But he knew Lena was right. He was involved. And involvement was its own point of no return. He thought he was overwhelmed already. He had no idea what the next day would bring. The next file he opened in Chapter 4 would change everything. Not because of what it contained, but because of whose name appeared in it. A name that would rip away the last thin veil between Jared's world and Bradley's darkness. Jared arrived at the precinct the next morning with a sense of dread so thick it felt like a weight strapped across his chest. It was there when he stepped into the shower, when he brushed his teeth, when he watched Evan slurp cereal while complaining that the milk tasted weird. It followed him into the car, tucked itself into the passenger seat, and stared at him in the rearview mirror the whole drive. He didn't know exactly what waited for him today, but he felt the shape of it like something crouching in the shadows, waiting to pounce. The building looked the same from the outside, squat, utilitarian, uncaring. But the air inside it felt colder, sharper, more alert. Officers moved through the halls with their usual coffee cups and clipped conversations. But Jared couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, tracking his movements. He kept his gaze low, avoided unnecessary conversations, and walked toward the records room with the slow steps of a man marching into court. Inside, only 2 clerks were present, both early morning staffers who barely looked up when he entered. He took his seat, the same worn chair with the scratch along the metal leg, and reached for the next stack of files. He forced himself to breathe evenly. Routine. Just follow routine. That's how you survive. But routine shattered the moment he opened the top folder. The first page stopped him cold. He blinked, looked again, feeling his blood evaporate. The suspect's name was familiar, not because he'd seen it in another report, not because it belonged to someone connected to Bradley, but because he knew the name personally. The folder was an arrest record for Daniel McKinley. McKinley, his old boss, the man whose glass door Jared had punched, the man who'd called the sheriff on him with that smug grin. Jared's breath stalled. His throat tightened like a vice. He forced himself to turn the page. It wasn't a minor infraction. It wasn't unpaid parking tickets or disorderly conduct. It was a narcotics arrest, distribution-level quantities. Meth and fentanyl found in a storage unit leased in McKinley's name. But the strangest part? The suspect listed as released after 22 hours. Charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. He read that line 8 times. Insufficient evidence. Even though the arresting officer reported clear possession. Jared leaned back in his chair, heart pounding so loudly he could swear the clerks heard it. McKinley had been arrested for something that could have put him away for years, and he was released, just like all the other suspects tied to Bradley's unit. Jared felt the room tilt around him. He turned to the supplemental notes. The handwriting was sloppy, like someone didn't care if the words were readable. The name Bradley appeared at least twice, once approving release, once signing off on a rewritten timeline. Jared dropped the page. He looked at his hands. They were shaking violently, so badly he had to grab the edge of the desk to steady them. McKinley was part of whatever Bradley was doing. Or maybe McKinley had paid to make things disappear. Paid Bradley the same way Jared suspected the others had. Jared closed his eyes, pressing his palms against them as if he could shut out the truth. If McKinley was tied to all of this, then everything that had happened to Jared, every humiliation, every threat, every moment of his life shifting off balance, was not random. McKinley's arrest had happened before Jared broke the window, before the fight over unpaid wages, before the police were called on him. What if McKinley had been desperate for cash flow because he'd been raided? What if he'd lost product? Lost money? Lost supply? What if Jared's outburst wasn't bad luck, but the spark in a powder keg McKinley had been hiding behind that smirk? The implications twisted like a knife. Jared had spent months thinking he was the screw-up. But maybe, just maybe, he'd been caught in the gravity of someone else's crimes. He didn't know how long he stared at the report before he sensed someone standing behind him. His stomach dropped. He turned slowly. It wasn't Bradley. It was Lena. She took one look at his expression, then at the open folder, and her face changed instantly, softening into concern, then tightening into caution. "What did you find?" she whispered. Jared pushed the file toward her with a shaky hand. She scanned the pages, her brows knitting together. "McKinley," she murmured, "this is your..." My old boss. She kept reading. When she reached the part about the release, her lips parted in disbelief. He was arrested for this and let go in less than a day? No chance. This isn't how narcotics cases work. I know, Jared whispered. Lena flipped to the evidence log, eyes narrowing. This says the drugs recovered were miscounted, that the field test was inconclusive, that the suspect wasn't directly tied to the unit. This is bullshit. We both know it. Jared's voice cracked. Why would Bradley protect him? Lena looked at him with a mixture of pity and anger. You really don't know? Jared shook his head. McKinley's shop, she said. It was under investigation years ago for suspected trafficking connections. They couldn't prove it then, but his name has floated around more than once. He didn't run just an auto shop. He had other revenue streams. Jared felt the world freeze around him. He saw flashes. McKinley's long disappearances. The unexplained cash in the register. The customers who looked like they weren't there for car repairs. The back office always locked. The days McKinley was jittery, paranoid, almost panicked, and then suddenly calm after meeting friends. The truth hit Jared so hard he had to grip the desk to stay upright. I worked for him, Jared whispered. I was around all of it. I didn't know. I had no idea. That's why he kept stiffing your pay, Lena said quietly. He was bleeding money, probably paying off people, covering tracks. And then I broke the door like an idiot. No, Lena cut in. Don't even start blaming yourself for that. He called the cops because he's a coward, not because you're a criminal. Jared stared at the file. Do you think Bradley knew about me? About my connection to McKinley? Lena hesitated. I don't know. But if he did. She looked him in the eyes. You need to be careful. Jared felt faint. He forced himself to breathe, but every inhale felt like sandpaper. The room suddenly seemed too bright, too loud, too exposed. Anyone could walk in. Anyone could see the file. Anyone could read the name McKinley and connect the dots. He slammed the folder shut. Lena flinched. Jared, I can't be part of this, he whispered harshly. This isn't some internal corruption. This is my life, my job, my brother. I don't want Evan anywhere near this mess. Lena stepped closer. You're already in it. The moment you opened that file, the moment you saw that name, this became personal. That's exactly why I need out, Jared said. His voice cracked like glass. I'm not a cop. I'm not trained for any of this. I don't want to get shot because someone thinks I know something. Jared. No. His voice dropped lower. I can't drag Evan into this. He only has me. Lena stared at him with something like sympathy, but beneath it was steel. If you walk away now, who's going to stop Bradley? Who's going to expose the truth about what he's done? What he's covering up? You think internal affairs will just magically figure this out? I don't care about Bradley. Jared snapped before he could stop himself. I care about my brother. Silence. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them blinked. Lena finally exhaled, her shoulders dropping. I get it, she said softly. I really do. But listen to me, you are already in danger whether you help or not. Bradley has been watching you. You know that. He knows you're looking too closely. If you back off now without a cover story, without a plan, he'll know exactly why. Jared felt a chill crawl up his spine. She was right. He knew she was right. Bradley wouldn't just let him return to being invisible. Men like Bradley didn't tolerate loose ends. Jared sank slowly into his chair, pressing his palms against his temples. Why is this happening? He murmured. Why me? Why any of it? Because you noticed, Lena said. Because you didn't look away. Because you actually care what's in those files when most people just copy and sign. He stared at the folder with his old boss's name on it. The words blurred. He whispered, I don't know if I can do this. Lena crouched beside his chair, speaking softer, gentler. Then let me help you. You don't have to do everything. Just continue noticing. Carefully. Quietly. Let me handle the risky parts. Her sincerity struck him like a hand to the chest. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he nodded just once. Lena rose to her feet and took a deep breath. Okay, then here's what we do. Keep the file hidden with the others. Don't move it. Don't take it home. I'll try to access the digital version and see if anyone else touched it. Meanwhile, you keep your head down. Don't draw attention. And Jared. She leaned in slightly. Don't read anything alone. If something feels wrong, tell me. Immediately. He nodded again. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. Steady, grounding, then walked toward the door. But she froze. Standing in the doorway was Lieutenant Paul Bradley. His eyes were fixed on Lena's hand on Jared's shoulder. The room went cold. Slowly, Bradley stepped inside, letting the door close with a soft, ominous click. Well, he said, voice calm, almost amused. Isn't this a cozy little meeting? Lena straightened instantly. Lieutenant, she said with forced professionalism. Bradley looked between them, that thin smile curling. I didn't realize the two of you were spending so much time together. We were discussing file organization, Lena said. Is that so? Bradley asked, stepping closer. Funny. I wasn't aware Martin needed personal coaching. Jared felt sweat prick his hairline. He couldn't look at Bradley. He didn't dare. Bradley circled the table like a shark circling a drifting swimmer. I hope you're not filling his head with ideas, he said casually. He's here to work. Nothing more. Lena kept her expression neutral. He's doing his job. Bradley's gaze flicked to the pile of files near Jared's elbow, the very stack containing all the inconsistencies. Jared's breath hitched, but Bradley looked away without acknowledging it. Or pretended to. He leaned in, placing both hands on the desk so close that Jared could smell the faint chemical tang of his aftershave. You remember what I told you, Martin? Bradley said softly. Don't complicate your job. Jared nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. Bradley lingered there a moment longer, eyes boring into him, before straightening with a curt shrug. Good, he said, turning toward the door. I'd hate to see a promising young man ruin his chance at a clean slate. He left the room. The door shut behind him with a quiet thud. Jared didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until Lena whispered urgently, Don't react. Don't move. Don't give him the satisfaction. He forced himself to breathe. When the tremors in his hands finally calmed, Lena said, We don't have long. Bradley's circling. He smells blood. What now? Jared asked, voice shaking. Now, she said. We find something he can't bury. Her words would define everything that came next. Because in Chapter 5, Jared would uncover the piece of evidence Bradley feared most. The one that would turn suspicion into certainty, and danger into something far more desperate. For the rest of the day, Jared felt like he was moving underwater. The world around him, voices, footsteps, the hum of fluorescent lights, felt muffled and distant, as though he'd been separated from everyone else by a thin pane of glass. He copied reports mechanically, his eyes reading lines he wouldn't remember later, his hands moving with the stiff, haunted rhythm of someone trying desperately to appear normal. But nothing inside him felt normal. Not with Lieutenant Bradley prowling like a predator who just scented a wounded animal. Not with the knowledge that his old boss had been tangled in the same corruption web that was tightening around him. Not with the heavy, unspoken fear that at any moment, someone might walk into the records room and quietly ask him to step into an office from which he'd never return. He kept his head down, kept his breath steady, kept his hands from shaking by digging his fingernails into his palms under the desk. Lena didn't come back. He didn't know if that scared him more or less. Hours passed. The clerks changed shifts. Lunch came and went. Bradley didn't return to the records room, but his shadow seemed to linger in every corner. Jared felt it behind every stack of files, every opening door, every set of footsteps that paused outside the room before continuing. Near the end of his shift, the head clerk brought him a new box of documents. Older ones with aging paper edges and fading ink. Pull anything fragile, she said. We need digital backups on these. They're falling apart. Jared nodded, grateful for the routine, grateful for something that didn't involve danger or corruption or the guilt now festering inside him. He opened the box. Inside were files from nearly 8 years ago. Thick ones. Most looked untouched since the day they'd been stored. The paper had yellowed at the edges. Some staples had rusted. He reached for the top folder and began reading. The first few were routine. Vandalism, petty theft, a runaway teen. Then he found juvenile cases, usually sealed but here only in summary form. He copied each carefully, mindful of the fragile paper. But then his hand stopped. He saw a name. Not McKinley. Not Bradley. Something worse. Someone he recognized long before the adult face had formed. His brother, Evan. The file wasn't an arrest. It was a witness note attached to an older case from when Evan would have been about 6 years old. Jared frowned deeply, flipping the page with trembling fingers. The incident? A domestic disturbance. Address? Their old home. Before their father died. Before their mother disappeared. Jared felt his breath leave his body in a rush. He remembered that night vaguely, through a fog of childhood fear. Raised voices, crashing sounds, and the heavy thump of his father falling after drinking too much. He remembered shielding Evan, pressing him against the wall, whispering that everything would be okay even though he knew it wasn't. He remembered the neighbor calling the cops. He didn't remember a report. And he definitely didn't remember the name of the responding officer. But now he saw it. Officer Paul Bradley. 8 years ago. Jared's entire body went cold. Every muscle stiffened. He felt his fingers go numb as he stared at the name burned into the header. No, that didn't make sense. Bradley wasn't even a lieutenant back then. But the badge number matched. The signature, sloppier, younger, but unmistakable, was his. Jared turned the page. There, in rushed handwriting, was a summary of the events. The notes were brief, almost dismissive. A few lines stood out like flashing lights. Child claims father hit mother. No injuries visible at time. Mother refused statement. Incident closed. But that wasn't the truth. Jared remembered bruises. He remembered his mother crying. He remembered begging the officer not to leave them alone with their father. He remembered Bradley kneeling down and saying, "Sometimes families fight. It's not the police's job to solve every little argument." He'd forgotten that moment, or buried it so deeply it only returned now, tearing up through his memory like a weed through cracked asphalt. Jared slammed the file shut. "What the hell?" he whispered. He stood too quickly. The chair scraped across the tile, drawing curious looks from the clerks across the room. Jared mumbled some excuse, grabbed the file, and hurried to the hallway. His legs moved without direction, his breath coming in uneven bursts. 8 years ago, Bradley had walked away from their home. 8 years ago, he had dismissed a terrified child. 8 years ago, he had allowed everything that came afterward. The breakdown, the drunken rages, the night their father collapsed, the day their mother left, the fracture of their whole lives. Jared leaned against the wall, gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't know how long he stood like that before he heard soft footsteps approaching. Lena. Her expression shifted instantly when she saw the file in his hands and the devastation on his face. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "I found something. Something from 8 years ago." Her brow furrowed. "What kind of case?" "My family's." Lena's face went pale. "Let me see." He handed her the file with trembling fingers. She opened it and read the summary, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Bradley responded to this?" she asked. "Yes, Jared. This is a terrible report. No follow-up, no photographs, no verification. This isn't just a bad call. This is negligence." He let out a shaky breath. "He wrote that nothing was wrong, that there were no injuries. But my mother, she was bruised. I remember." Lena's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." Jared looked at her, his expression raw. "Why would he bury this? Why would he ignore it?" She hesitated. "Maybe your father owed someone something. Maybe Bradley had orders not to escalate domestic calls for reasons unrelated to your family. Or," she swallowed, "maybe this isn't the first case he buried. But why mine? Jared choked out. Why my family? Lena didn't answer, because the truth was too big to fit into any single explanation. Jared pressed a hand to his forehead, leaning forward. He walked away. He left us there. He left us with him. Lena placed a steadying hand on his arm. Listen to me. I know this hurts. But this file... She lifted it slightly. This isn't just negligence. It's another pattern. Another inconsistency. Another piece of evidence. I don't want it to be evidence, Jared whispered, his voice cracking. I don't want this connected to him. I don't want my life to be part of whatever he's doing. Lena stepped closer. Her voice was gentle but firm. Then you need to face the truth. Bradley has been cutting corners for years, maybe decades. He didn't suddenly become corrupt. He grew into it. And if he ignored your family, if he ignored your mother, then he's been hurting people long before money was ever involved. Jared felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked them away angrily. I shouldn't be part of this. I didn't ask for this. No, Lena said. But you're the one who found it. And maybe that means you're the one meant to expose him. Jared's breath trembled. He felt the truth of her words settle in his gut like a weight he was never meant to carry. Come with me, Lena said quietly. Not here. Somewhere we can talk. He nodded. They slipped out of the records room and made their way through the hallways with the kind of silent coordination shared by people who know they're being watched even when no one is visible. They walked past a bulletin board littered with outdated flyers, past the water cooler, and past the narrow hallway leading to storage. Bradley stepped out just as they approached. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just looked at them with that same cold, assessing gaze that saw too much and revealed too little. Everything all right? He asked finally, voice mild but laced with something razor-sharp. Yes, Lena said quickly. Just escorting Martin to fill out additional service paperwork. Bradley's eyes slid to Jared. Slow. Calculating. You handling your duties well today, Martin? Jared swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Good. Bradley's gaze flicked to the file under Lena's arm. That doesn't belong outside the records room. Temporary removal, Lena said. Training purposes. Bradley's jaw tightened. Not enough to be noticeable by anyone else, but enough for Jared to see the irritation flicker behind his eyes. Return it promptly, Bradley said. We don't want any confusion. He stepped aside, but the threat hung in the air like the stench of gasoline. Lena waited until they turned the corner before whispering. He knows, or he suspects, or both. Jared felt a surge of panic. What do? We keep moving. Don't stop. Don't think too long. That's when you get caught. They slipped into a small and used conference room and shut the door. Lena locked it. The silence inside felt suffocating. Lena spread the file on the table. This is big. Bigger than anything we've found. Not because it's your family, though I know that matters, but because it shows a pattern that predates everything else. Jared stared at the handwritten report, the hastily scribbled lines, the dismissive phrasing. This isn't incompetence, he whispered. This is who he's always been. Lena nodded slowly. We need to find out what he didn't want recorded. How? We pull the call logs from that night, dispatch notes, any follow-up communication, and we look for gaps. Missing audio, missing timestamps, erased data. Won't he notice? Eventually, she said. But by then, we'll have copies. Jared rubbed his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. I don't know if I can do this, Lena. You can, she said softly. Because you already have. He looked at her. Her expression was determined, resolute. Her loyalty, unexpected, undeserved, felt like the one solid thing he could lean on. Lena opened her mouth to speak again, but a loud knock at the door cut her off. 3 sharp, heavy raps. Not a clerk, not a janitor, not someone knocking out of courtesy. Lena's eyes went wide. Don't say a word, she mouthed. She moved to the door and opened it only an inch. A deep voice spoke through the gap. Officer Grayson, the lieutenant wants to see you. Bradley's messenger. The kind of officer who didn't ask questions. He only delivered orders. Lena kept her tone neutral. "I'll be right there." The footsteps receded. Lena shut the door and turned to Jared. "This is it," she whispered. "He's tightening the leash. We need to act fast." "What do I do?" Jared asked, fear surging. "Go back to the records room. Keep your head down. Don't look nervous. Don't touch anything else today. I'll handle Bradley." "And the file?" She slid it into her jacket. "I'll make a copy. A digital one. Something he can't erase." "What if he—" "I can handle him." He believed her. Somehow, he believed her more than he believed his own instincts. Lena placed her hand briefly over his. "Stay alive today." Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Jared stood alone in the silent room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant bees. He swallowed, breathing hard. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if Lena could keep Bradley at bay. But he knew one thing with crystal clarity. Everything was spiraling now. And in Chapter 6, the spiral would tighten because that night someone would follow Jared home. Someone who had orders. Someone who wasn't Bradley. But someone even more dangerous. Night fell over Ridgeview like a slow, bruised exhale, draining the color from the desert until only the faint orange glow of streetlights cut through the darkness. Jared drove home in silence, the engine humming beneath him, the steering wheel vibrating faintly under his palms. The world felt blurred, stretched thin, like he was watching himself through a fogged mirror. Someone would follow him home tonight. He hadn't seen anyone tailing him, not directly, but he felt it, like cold fingers tracing the base of his spine. Bradley was tightening everything. Lena had said it. The files had said it. His own instincts screamed it. But the worst part, the part that gnawed at him, was that he didn't know whether the danger would come from Bradley himself or from the shadows he employed. Men he trusted. Men who didn't question. Men who did things quietly. He turned onto the road leading to his house. The neighborhood was quiet, small single-story homes nestled under old saguaros and mesquite trees. His headlights washed over his yard. Patchy grass, a leaning mailbox, the porch light flickering weakly. Home, the place he fought to protect. He parked, stepped out and listened. The air was warm and still. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Nothing in the darkness moved. But he knew better than to trust stillness. Inside, Evan was on the couch, curled up under a blanket, watching a space documentary again. The kid looked sleepy, his hair messy, his socks mismatched. He beamed when he saw his brother. "You're late. I saved you the last slice of pizza." Jared forced a smile. "Thanks, buddy." Evan paused the documentary and sat up. "You okay? You look weird." "I'm fine." Jared tousled his hair. "Long day." It was the truth, just not the whole truth. He ate the pizza, lukewarm but still good, and listened to Evan talk about planets and orbits and a future where he'd be an engineer or maybe an astronaut. Listening to him was like breathing oxygen after drowning. For a moment, the world felt normal. But that moment didn't last. When Evan finally went to bed, the house sank into silence. A heavy, humming silence. Jared stood in the living room with all the lights off, staring through the thin curtains at the street. His heart hammered in his chest. The street looked empty, but he could feel it. Someone was there. He walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where they kept miscellaneous tools, screwdrivers, tape, a flashlight, and grabbed the heaviest wrench. It wasn't much, but it was something. He tested the weight of it in his hand. The front porch creaked. His entire body froze. A car door shut in the distance, soft, controlled. Then footsteps. Slow, unhurried, confident. Jared moved quietly to the front window and peeked through a gap in the curtain. A figure was standing at the end of his driveway. Not Bradley. Bigger, broader shoulders. He couldn't see the face, only the silhouette backlit by a street lamp. It wasn't a neighbor. The man stood there for a long moment, waiting. Then he began walking toward the house. Jared's pulse jumped to his throat. He backed away from the window, glancing toward the hallway where Evan slept. He couldn't let anything happen to him. He couldn't let this man through the door. He braced himself, wrench in hand. The footsteps climbed the porch steps. 1, 2, 3. Then, a soft knock. Not pounding. Not aggressive. 3 gentle, deliberate knocks. Jared nearly choked on his own breath. The man knew he was home. He knew Evan was inside. He knew exactly where to find them. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. "Jared Martin," a calm voice said. "We need to talk. Not a demand. Not an order. A quiet inevitability." Jared moved to the door, keeping his voice low. "I'm not opening it." "You don't have to," the man replied. "But I'm not leaving until you hear what I came to say." Jared didn't move. Sweat rolled down his spine. The man spoke again almost patiently. "You think Bradley sent me?" Silence. "But he didn't." Jared swallowed hard. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, "Someone who knows what he's capable of." That sent a jolt through Jared. He took a cautious step closer but didn't open the door. "How do I know that's true?" "You don't," the man replied. "But if I wanted to hurt you, the door wouldn't matter." Jared's grip on the wrench tightened involuntarily. The man wasn't wrong. The door was barely solid. A swift kick could take it down. "Give me one reason," Jared said. "Why I shouldn't call the police right now." A soft exhale. Almost a laugh. "Call them if you want. But Bradley's the one who sees those calls first. And he knows where you live." Jared's heart pounded. Then the man said something that froze him entirely. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because Lena Grayson told me to come." Jared stumbled backward, shock scraping through him. "Lena? She sent someone?" "Open the door," the man said quietly. "I'm on your side." Jared hesitated, his mind racing. Lena trusted almost no one. She had said she'd handle Bradley. She'd left with that file. She knew she was walking into the lion's den. Maybe she'd prepared for this. Maybe she'd known something would happen to Jared tonight. Slowly, breath trembling, he unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door an inch. The man outside wasn't wearing a uniform. Jeans, a dark jacket, hands visible, no weapons. His face was rugged, weathered, mid-40s, with a scar running from his cheekbone toward his jawline. His eyes were steady, calm, tired. "My name's Sam Helton," he said. "I used to work internal affairs." "Used to." Jared opened the door wider, tension coiling through him. "What do you mean, used to?" Sam glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside quickly. Once the door shut, he exhaled hard. "Bradley forced me out. 2 years ago. I got too close to one of his cases." Jared's blood chilled. "And you survived?" "Barely." Sam rubbed the scar on his jaw. "But I've been tracking him ever since. And when Lena found me and told me what you'd uncovered, I knew Bradley would react." "Where's Lena?" Jared asked urgently. Sam's expression darkened. "She didn't show up to our meeting spot." Jared staggered back as if struck. No. "I don't know what's happened," Sam said quickly. "But I know this. She told me you were the one who could bring Bradley down." "Me?" Jared whispered. "I'm a mechanic, a guy doing community service. I don't even belong in that building." "You belong exactly where you are," Sam said. "You're the only person Bradley underestimated. The only person he thinks he can intimidate into silence." Jared felt sick. "I don't want to get Evan involved in this. I don't want to put him in danger." Sam's voice softened. "Which is why we have to finish this. Tonight." Jared stared at him, breath uneven. "Finish what?" "Exposing Bradley. Getting the evidence Lena tried to pull. Before he destroys it. Before he destroys her." The room tilted around Jared. "Is she alive?" he asked. Sam didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said at last, the words heavy with regret. "But if she is, she's running out of time." Jared closed his eyes. He saw Lena's hand gripping his arm. Her quiet strength. Her fierce determination. The moment she told him, "Stay alive," he opened his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" he whispered. Sam nodded once. "We go back to the precinct. Now, we get the digital recordings from the secure server. The ones Lena accessed. The ones Bradley can't alter without setting off alarms. Jared hesitated. But the building, it's locked after hours. Not to me, Sam said, pulling a small access card from his pocket. Some doors stay in your possession even after they try to erase you. Another chill. But this time it wasn't fear, it was resolve. Jared left Evan a note. Simple, harmless. Went to run an errand. Lock the doors. Call me if you need anything. He hated himself for leaving Evan alone. But he also knew the only way to protect him was to end this nightmare at the source. He grabbed his jacket. Sam checked through the blinds. Coast is clear. Let's go. They stepped into the night. The air was warm but carried a faint, metallic undercurrent, like the sky knew something was coming. They drove without speaking, the highway stretching like a lonely promise ahead of them. Streetlights flickered by like dying fireflies. Ridgeview shrank behind them as the city lights grew. When they reached the precinct, the parking lot was half-lit and empty except for a few patrol cars. Sam handed Jared a small flashlight. We stick to the service entrances. Security cameras on the main hall are controlled by Bradley's guys. They slipped around the side of the building, their shadows long against the concrete. Sam swiped the access card. The door clicked open. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. No footsteps, no ringing phones, no voices, just the low hum of air vents. Jared's heart raced as they made their way down the hallway. Sam moved with practiced stealth, leading him past the briefing rooms, past the interrogation offices, toward a secure area Jared had never been allowed near. The server room. Sam stopped at the door. Once we're in, he whispered, we pull every file Lena touched, every report Bradley altered, every timestamp she flagged. I'll copy it to a drive he can't detect. Then we get out. Then what? Jared asked. Then we take it straight to the state-level investigators. Ones Bradley can't reach. Sam swiped his access card. The lock clicked. They entered. Rows of servers hummed in the dim light. Blue and green LEDs blinked like watchful eyes. Sam moved quickly, pulling a portable drive from his pocket and connecting it. File directories flashed on the screen. He typed swiftly, searching for Lena's badge number access logs. There, he muttered. She pulled 3 years of Bradley's cases. Pattern recognition files. Tampered body cams. Deleted arrest reports. Oh God, there's more. Motions suppressed by the DA. Suspicious witness disappearances. This goes deeper than narcotics. Jared felt his stomach sink. Download everything. I plan to. Sam hit a key. A loud beep sounded. Jared froze. Sam's eyes widened in horror. No. That's a remote lock alert. Someone is accessing the system from outside. The door slammed behind them. Jared spun. Lieutenant Bradley stood in the doorway. A gun in his hand. A smile on his lips. Going somewhere, Martin? Jared's blood turned to ice. Bradley stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with a casual flick. I knew you'd lead me to Helton sooner or later. Sam stepped forward, jaw clenched. Let him go, Bradley. This ends tonight. Oh, it will, Bradley said softly. But not the way you think. He raised the gun. Sam moved quickly, lunging toward him. The gun fired. The blast echoed like thunder. Sam hit the ground, clutching his side, blood spreading beneath him. No! Jared screamed. Bradley turned the gun on him. I liked you, Martin, he said. Quiet, useful, predictable. But you just had to complicate things. Just like your mother did. Jared froze. My mother? Bradley smirked. She contacted Internal Affairs years ago. Tried to report your father's drinking. His violence. She wanted protection. I told her to let it go. Families should fix themselves. His voice dropped lower, dripping venom. She didn't listen, so I made sure her case never went anywhere. Jared felt something crack inside him. Not fear. Not despair. Something deeper. Something burning. He stepped forward. Bradley cocked the gun. Don't. But Jared didn't stop. Bradley pulled the trigger. But Sam lunged upward, grabbing Bradley's wrist. The shot fired into the ceiling. Jared saw his chance. He rushed forward, wrench in hand, swinging with every ounce of strength he had left. The wrench connected with Bradley's arm. Bradley cried out, dropping the gun. Jared swung again, and again, and again, until the man who had haunted his life for 8 years lay unconscious on the floor. Silence flooded the room. Sam slumped, blood staining his shirt. Jared dropped the wrench and rushed to him. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me." Sam exhaled shakily. "Get the drive, Jared. Take it and go." "But you, go!" Sam screamed, pain twisting his voice. Jared grabbed the drive from the terminal. Lights blinked red, security alerts flashing everywhere. He staggered to Sam. "I won't leave you." Sam gave a weak smile. "You're a good man, better than you know. Now go before the backup arrives." Jared swallowed his grief and stood. He ran down the hall, through the side exit, across the lot, into the night. Sirens screamed behind him, but he didn't stop. The drive burned in his pocket like a lifeline. The truth, all of it. He made it home before dawn. Evan ran out, terrified, confused. "Jared, what happened? Why are you bleeding?" Jared fell to his knees and hugged him tightly. "It's over," he whispered. "It's finally over." Later that morning, he took the drive to the nearest state investigator's office. He handed over everything, the reports, the logs, the footage, the domestic file from 8 years ago. Investigations launched. Arrests were made. Bradley's entire network collapsed. News outlets swarmed the city. Lena was found alive, bruised, shaken, but alive. Sam Helton survived his wounds. And Jared Martin, a mechanic, a nobody, a man who only wanted to protect his brother, became the unlikely voice of truth in the darkest corner of the justice system. Months later, when the dust settled, Jared stood in the desert at sunset, Evan beside him. The sky glowed orange and pink, casting long shadows across the sand. "You okay?" Evan asked softly. Jared breathed deeply. The air smelled clean. "I think," he said, "for the first time in a long time, yeah, I'm okay." Evan leaned against him. "You're a hero, you know." Jared shook his head. "No," he said gently. "I'm just someone who finally did what needed to be done." Evan smiled. "That's what heroes are." Jared looked at the horizon. Wide, open, unbroken. A place where new beginnings lived. And for the first time in his life, he felt something loosen inside him. He felt free. The desert wind shifted, warm and soft, brushing against his skin like a promise. Whatever came next, he was ready. He had his brother. He had the truth. He had a future. The story of Jared Martin, the man once assigned to copy forgotten police reports, ended not with fear, but with quiet triumph. A reminder that sometimes the smallest voices uncover the biggest truths. And sometimes healing begins the moment you stop running from the past and decide to face it.